Hello, I'm Lugatorix and welcome to my Vandals faction guide for Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion. So if you may remember, in the past, quite a while ago, I did faction guides for all the Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion factions. I think I did all of them, and the only faction for some reason I didn't cover was the Vandals. I have no idea why I left the Vandals to last. I have no idea why several months later I am revisiting the Vandals, but people did want me to sort of complete this series, and this is the only faction, traditionally playable faction anyway, that I haven't covered. So I thought it's important that I do, and it's an interesting faction actually because, of course, it is a Horde faction. They start off with no territory at all, just a few armies up here in the sort of what you'd call sort of modern-day Russia, Ukraine kind of area. And it's your job basically to sort of build an empire from basically nothing. So certainly quite interesting in that respect. The only faction similar to this is, of course, the Huns, who start off just next door, but we're talking about the Vandals today, and let's have a look at the Vandals. So as it says over here, to win the main campaign you have to hold 10 settlements, including Baetica, Africa and northern Italy. Not sure if I'm saying that right, but basically it's southern Spain, this area which is Carthage in the base game, and northern Italy over here. So we're going to be starting off talking about the troop types actually by having a look at all the units available in the campaign, and then we'll go on to the campaign map and have a look at some strategy. So I'll see you in a second. So here are the Vandal units, and it's an interesting bunch actually. Some very good cavalry, some very interesting units, and we're just going to get straight into it with the worst, which is Peasants. Now the interesting thing about Peasants are, and I seem to remember this back from my Huns faction guide, the Huns don't have Peasants. Their lowest unit is actually the Steppe Spearmen. Just an interesting little fact if you wanted to know that. I'm pretty sure that's true. But anyway, we're talking about Peasants, and Peasants are pretty much the same for all factions. They're pretty damn trash. 3 attack, 5 defense, 2 charge bonus. They haven't got poor morale, so they're not completely terrible, but the stats are just very low. Really, Peasants in Rome Total War are mostly used for either transferring population across settlements because they have a large unit size. They're very efficient for doing that, but also they can just be used for sort of carrying rams or just to sort of fill up the numbers. They're a nice cheap unit, but in terms of actual impact on the battlefield, don't rely on them at all because they don't have a good defense and they won't pack a punch. Pretty obvious, but yeah. Anyway, then we move on to Steppe Spearmen, which we were just talking about a second ago, and they are certainly a step up, I would say. 6 attack, 11 defense, 4 charge bonus, but still a fairly defensive unit. So that charge bonus isn't particularly impactful. What they are good at is fighting cavalry, like it says, and they can do a skiltrum, which is a sort of defensive formation, a bit like the spear wall formation in Medieval 2 Total War. Now, I don't hate these guys at all, actually. On normal unit scale, 120 men per unit, and that's good. A large unit means, of course, it's going to take more hits for them to go down. Even if you take out 60 of them, they've still got more men than, most of these sort of cavalry units or so. So, still a pretty good sized unit is a good thing, of course. The morale is pretty average. It's not good, it's not bad, which is okay, but yeah, a decent defensive unit. The thing is with the Vandals, and the same goes for the Huns as well, is really, in my experience, I don't use too much infantry, and there's several reasons for that. First of all, in terms of actual campaign strategy, you really want to be moving fast throughout the map. You're going to be on the open field, much like the Horde factions were in real life, the Huns and all that. In real life, were mostly on horseback because they were moving large distances, moving quickly. They were sort of nomadic in that respect, right? I think so. And infantry just kind of slows the whole process down. Also, a lot of your battles are going to be on the open field, and on the open field, unless you're fighting in settlements or whatever, really defensive units aren't hugely impactful when you've got a very cavalry-based army, is what I would say. A unit like Steppe Spearmen is quite good if you're being attacked, or if you're being attacked in a settlement. But the thing is, you don't own any settlements in the early game. It's unlikely you are going to own any settlements until fairly into the campaign, and that reduces the need for this kind of spearman unit. But certainly not a bad unit, and when you do start to sort of have more defensive battles, then they will become more prevalent in your sort of strategy, I would say. Then we move on to Steppe Swordsmen. They fight on foot with swords, shields, and some armour protection. Not quite heavy infantry, but are considered too well armed to be considered light troops. So 9 and 15 is actually very solid stats for infantry. Certainly that's not too bad at all. And this is, although not a particularly defensive unit, actually a very solid defense considering that indeed. They've got a war cry which improves their attack. But again, a little bit unruly. They may charge without orders, and this is a fairly unruly army because it's a sort of rebel, not rebel army, but it's a barbarian. That's the word, a barbarian army, hence the DLC name. and that means they might charge forward without the command. It can be a little bit annoying, but again, that's not hugely important, I think, in my experience, because with the Vandals, you're not going to have a sort of compact, disciplined army that you are going to with the Romans. Of course, if you're playing as the Romans, or you want to have a faction like that, then really you're not going to want to choose the Vandals, because it's not all about discipline. It's about fighting hard. It's about moving across the map and being fairly brutal. Barbarians, right? So I don't think that particularly affects anything at all. But of course, if you do like a heavily disciplined army, then that can be a bit of an issue. But honestly, with a 15 defense and a 9 attack, even if they do charge forward without a command, they're still probably going to do a pretty decent job, especially against the other factions, which a lot of them have very poor infantry indeed. They start off in a very cavalry-based area, so actually the fact they've got decent infantry is very much an advantage comparatively to what's around them. Next up, we have Steppe Horde Chosen Warriors. This is a Horde unit, like it kind of says. Attack of 11, defense of 22. Very high defense. I would say it's a very, very decent defense, and the attack is pretty damn solid indeed. But what makes them even better is the good morale and well armored. This means these guys are going to be very, very hard to chunk down. They're hard. They've got, they're not going to go down easily anyway from like swords or arrows or whatever, because of that high defense, that good armor and that solid shield they've got. But the fact that also their morale is high, they're not going to run out of stamina and all of that, it means they're not going to break easily. They're going to fight until the very end, even if most of the unit is gone down. And just a very solid unit, These guys are going to chunk through the opposition. They're going to do a good job, and morale, I've said this a million times in my faction guides, are such a huge part of Rome Total War, because it can really turn the tide of a battle. If one unit breaks, it can cause a domino effect to affect the rest of the army, and the army can collapse within seconds. But having that one unit just to fight that little bit longer, even if they're going down quickly, is a very, very valuable asset indeed. So a very solid unit, but it is a Horde unit, so consider that, of course. Then we have Steppe Heavy Spearmen. This is more the kind of defensive unit that we were talking about at the very beginning. The last few units have been Swordsmen, which is typically a more offensive unit, I would say. But these guys, good morale, well armoured, very similar stuff. I'm not going to sort of go over the same stuff over and over again. Similar stats, but a sort of more defensive focus. These guys are going to become particularly useful when you are defending settlements later on in the game, when you actually do have some settlements, or when you're on the open field and maybe the opposition has a lot of cavalry and you need to protect your archers or your units against them. They're going to do a good job fighting the cavalry with that bonus. They're going to stand strong and sort of compact and just sort of defend against whatever, whether that's a wall, whether that's defending the archers on the battlefield. It doesn't really matter. They're going to stand there and do a job. So very solid infantry unit again. Quite an all-round army. I mean, there isn't a lot of missile troops, particularly infantry missile troops. We will get onto that in a second. But actually, the infantry isn't too bad at all. Really not too bad. Then we have the Steppe Raiders. This is the only archers infantry that we have, but a pretty damn good unit as well, actually. Long-range missiles is the first thing that really jumps out to my mind here, but we'll talk about the stats as well. 7 attack and 11 defense means they're actually pretty competent in the melee. Now, not hugely useful because archers really aren't going to be in the melee, but what it means is they're not a terrible liability if for some reason a unit of cavalry comes around the flanks and accidentally hits them or whatever happens. Or if you're just down to your last few men and you need that extra little boost in the infantry, they won't do a terrible job. Really not too bad. But obviously their specialisation is missiles. A missile attack of 9 is pretty damn solid indeed. But long-range missiles is very, very useful. And I say this all the time in my Rome Total War faction guides, that long-range missiles is such an advantage because it means that you can hit your opponents before they hit you, and that means you can start getting hits, you can start getting morale damage and so on and so forth, even before they've got anywhere near you. You prop these guys on top of a hill, on top of a wall, on top of any kind of height advantage, and they're going to do a massive amount of damage from very, very far away, which is excellent. So a very solid unit of archers indeed. Not a lot of variety. They haven't got skirmishers or like javelin men or slingers or whatever. Doesn't really matter. When you've got solid units of infantry and solid units of archers, that's okay. They're going to do a decent job. But I prefer the cavalry, and that's what we're going to get onto now. So let's get on to the cavalry, and we have mounted Aryan priests. I mean, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's not the same kind of Aryan as in what is sort of synonymous with the Nazis or whatever, because that's Aryan, right? I think so. But anyway, that's a little bit of a sort of a tangent, we'll just sort of move on from that very swiftly because that's a completely wrong era. Anyway, priests inspire nearby troops to acts of great bravery through their prayers and blessings. 3 attack, 7 defense, 2 charge. Vulnerable to missiles, fast moving. So this is a very interesting unit. Now, in my experience, most of the sort of morale units, particularly if we're talking about the Rome Total War base game, are actually infantry units. You know, you have the Screeching Women, for example. You do have the priests. I think it's the Romans. They do have the priests in Barbarian Invasion. You know, so on and so forth. There are various units kind of like this. But yeah, they're all infantry units, not cavalry mostly. And this makes this unit quite interesting in my opinion. The fact that it's sort of a more mobile unit, but it's a mobile morale unit. Now on the face of things, honestly, they don't look that amazing. 3 attack is very, very low. It's the lowest we've seen so far, I think, maybe excluding the Peasants. And then 7 defense, not that amazing for cavalry as well. But first of all, this is a unit of light cavalry. So even if you exclude the whole morale chanting thing, their job is actually to be fast, is to get around the flanks quickly, to chase down units, so on and so forth. So light cavalry generally doesn't have incredibly amazing melee stats anyway, but that's not really their purpose. Their purpose is for the chant. Now, like I said earlier, morale is such a huge, huge part of Rome Total War, and this unit kind of sums it all up. The importance of this unit kind of sums it all up anyway, because this unit, if you do the chant, kind of like the war cry or whatever, it can inspire the nearby units, and it means a unit that is maybe just about to break, they might be wavering or whatever, might go up a morale level, and they might go from wavering to shaken, from shaken to steady, from steady to eager, or whatever, yeah? And it means that if the battle is sort of on a knife edge, you have your infantry fighting against their infantry, and it's the kind of thing where whichever unit breaks first, the rest of the army is going to collapse. And you've got to keep on that a little bit longer, particularly on the high difficulties. Just keep chugging away that a little bit longer. Just don't break. Do anything, but just don't break. Well, these mounted priests, we'll just call them, these mounted priests will just keep them that little bit longer, and those extra few seconds might be just enough to get the opposition to break. So, honestly, although these stats don't look amazing, you might not bother to get these guys or use these guys or whatever. Actually, very well worth it, particularly in emergency situations where you desperately need that morale bonus. So, very, very cool indeed. And actually, the Vandals have pretty good morale overall. There are no sort of weak spots in the army. Even the Peasants don't have poor morale. There are no particular weak spots where it's like morale is a real issue. But the combination of having a pretty solid sort of base morale level for the army alongside units that can chant and boost the morale in times of emergency, that's pretty OP in my opinion. Next up, the Steplancers. Now, the interesting thing about Steplancers is they're a unit of shock cavalry. And I like my cavalry anyway. I'm a big fan of cavalry. I think cavalry is a bit overpowered in Rome Total War. But I always think cavalry is quite interesting, particularly units like this, shock cavalry. Because in some respects, they really don't look that amazing. A 5 attack is pretty low. It's not even that much better than the damn priests, to be honest. 15 defense is pretty solid, I'll give them that. But it's the charge, the 10 charge bonus, which is their massive bonus, their real strength. They can form a wedge, they can just charge into a unit and just cause havoc, morale havoc in particular, and we've already discussed many times how important morale is. So this unit I would say use fairly sparingly, use at the right moment, have this unit as sort of the ace up your sleeve that you can sort of withdraw and, well, withdraw is a poor use of the word, but take out and use and strike at that very important moment. That's the kind of unit that this is, really. You know, like I said just a second ago, if the battle is sort of on a knife edge, you have 2 units slugging it out, whichever unit breaks first is going to lose the whole battle. Well, actually, if you get a unit of Steplancers to charge into the side, that can sort of decide it for you, and you actually... The infantry morale issue is kind of sorted by the fact that the Steplancers are going to destroy the morale of one unit. They can target one unit in particular, one weak unit, and it can cause a domino effect of morale breaking. So actually a very, very solid unit indeed. As I say, don't use them to sort of like slugging match or whatever. Don't use them to sort of grind up against the opponent. That's not what you want. You want to use a one swift, impactful charge to sort of end the game, and this is what the Steplancers are going to do. So again, very solid unit. I do like them indeed. And then we have the Steppe Warriors, the fighting elite of their tribe, horsemen without peer, aggressive and cunning in battle. Good description. 7 attack, 18 defense, 7 charge bonus. Well armoured and good stamina. Not a huge amount to say about these guys, just a very solid unit of cavalry. Good defense. I would like their attack to be a little bit higher, to be honest, but they have got a pretty decent charge. Not quite as amazing as the Steplancers, but a pretty good charge indeed. The 18 defense means they're more sort of equipped for that sort of slugging match if you kind of want that. But in general, you want the infantry to do the whole one-on-one, fighting for ages, whatever. The cavalry is more for that impact, that big charge to end the battle. But still a very solid unit, more sort of defensive than the previous unit. But I do like them indeed. Very good unit of cavalry. Then we get on to steppe nobles, heavily armed and armoured warriors who are expected to charge into enemies and hack them to pieces. 10 attack, which is the highest we've seen so far. 22 defense, highest we've seen so far. Good morale, well armoured and good stamina. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but this is a damn good unit. It's a damn good unit. It's pretty much... That's pretty much all I've got to say about that. Very, very high defense means that even if they do get stuck in the slugging match, they're going to do well for a long time. Very hard to sort of hack down. They've got a decent attack, which is good. Good morale means they're going to be around for a long time, and well armoured means they're not vulnerable to missiles. Is there anything more I need to say? This is a damn good unit of cavalry. You need good cavalry for the Vandals campaign because you're going to be in the open field so much. It's also historically accurate because, as far as I know, the Horde factions, kind of like the Vandals and the Huns and whatever, did have really good cavalry, the Sarmatians, and this is an absolute example of that. So steppe nobles, very, very good indeed. Then we get on to the Warlord. Obviously the Warlord is going to be good. 23 defense, 13 attack, very, very solid indeed. 2 hit points, which essentially means they have, in my interpretation, sort of like 2 health bars. They basically they get like 2 lives almost. It means they have sort of double the amount of life as everyone else, which is very, very valuable indeed. It means they're even harder to get down, and that's of course good because these guys are going to be protecting the general. If the general goes down, you're really stuck for morale then. So yeah, very solid unit indeed. Excellent morale. Very, very hard to break down these guys, and as so often in Rome Total War and Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion, killing the general is such a huge part because it can cause once again a domino effect of morale breakages. And if your general is very well protected by a good unit of Warlord bodyguards, then actually you've got a big advantage over the opposition in that respect. So Warlord, definitely worth it. Good unit, of course they are. Then we get on to the Archer Cavalry. I can't speak today. I'm sorry, it is incredibly hot in England. It's really, really hot. It's like record temperatures over here, and I'm like dying of the heat while trying to record this, but whatever. Yeah, steppe horde horsemen, a little bit of a mouthful, but this is the first unit of Archer Cavalry that we've come across, and as is traditional in Rome Total War and Medieval 2 Total War, these units are just wildly overpowered, which is why I love them so much. 5 attack, 9 defense is their melee stats, and honestly that isn't particularly amazing, but you're not going to be using these guys in the melee. You're going to be using these guys to skirmish, to sort of annoy the opposition by running away every time they get close, but firing those damn arrows. And this is a Horde unit, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that already, but it's kind of in the name. 8 missile attack is a pretty damn decent for a Archer Cavalry. You know, you're not going to expect really, really high levels, but they're OP because they're fast moving, very hard to get down because you physically can't reach them. Just a very annoying unit for the opposition to deal with, honestly. They're going to get a lot of men down while basically taking no casualties themselves. Why wouldn't you want this unit? For a nice sort of flexible, agile, manoeuvrable army, this is sort of a staple of any such army, definitely. And then finally we get on to the steppe horse archers. Basically the same unit, just not the Horde version, so there isn't really much more I need to add. But again, a very good unit. And also what's interesting about some of the cavalry in Barbarian Invasion is that they can swim, which is interesting. You have units that can swim in Barbarian Invasion, meaning that actually in bridge battles, holding the individual bridge isn't quite as important or the center point or the focus of any battle as in the base game, because actually some units can sort of sneak around the side. If you think that's cool, I don't really ever use that. I don't think I've ever really used that, but if you think that's cool, then go for it. You might like this unit, but obviously that's not really what they're meant for. I just thought I'd add that in. So anyway, we've talked enough about the units. You can see it's a very solid army indeed. Not the most variety in any army, but solid morale, good defense. There's no real weak points. Even the peasants. I mean, the peasants are obviously the weak point, but you're not going to be using peasants much anyway. There's no obvious weakness in the army at all. It's just very, very solid indeed. So we're going to be moving on to some campaign strategy now. Let's go. So here we are. This is the starting position for the Vandals in Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion. The first message we get is a storm from the east. That is the neighbouring Huns, who are in a similar situation to us. I've talked about them already in my Huns faction guide, so you can go and check that out in the playlist if you want. And then we have another message, a powerful faith, which is paganism, which is our faith, or our religion, whatever. This is the Vandals starting position. As you can see, no settlements. We don't even own Vicus Vandali. We own nothing. The same goes for the neighbouring Huns, like I said. Around us, we've got a few factions with not many settlements, and also the potential to horde. The Burgundii, the Lombardi. We have the Sarmatians down here, and also the Goths down over here. So yeah, just be wary of that, but we'll talk about that in a second. So how do horde factions work? Well, pretty simply, when you take a settlement, you have several options, or when you march into a settlement and you defeat the army inside, you have several options. You have the option to sack the settlement, which basically means you'll get a huge amount of cash, but as this is a horde faction, you will crucially not take the settlement, but you will get a lot of money from it. Or you can occupy the settlement. If you occupy the settlement, you maybe won't get a huge amount of money like you would if you sacked it, but you now have the settlement, it's now your territory, and you can start earning tax revenue, or farming revenue, or trade revenue, or whatever. So what do you want to do? Well, really the point of these sort of horde factions are to conquer territory, or go through territory, get as much money as you can, and then eventually settle somewhere where you're kind of ready to sort of build your empire from. But the beginning stage of the campaign is kind of making money. Second half of the campaign is building territory, basically. And it's very crucial to decide where you're going to actually settle, where you're going to start off, where you're going to build your empire. You have a lot of freedom as the Vandals, which makes the horde faction so cool, because you can start your empire anywhere. I mean, if you start off, for example, as the Sassanids, you have no choice but to start off your empire here. If you start off as the Goths, this is where your empire is growing from. But actually, as the Vandals, the world is yours. Scarface kind of thing. The world is yours, and you can start anywhere you want. So where would I start? Well, not up here. Not up in Vicus Vandali. Not anywhere near here. There's several reasons why you don't want to settle here, really. Number one reason is this isn't a profitable region. These are rubbish little villages, no walls, no farming equipment, no sea trade. There's just nothing. And also, it takes flipping years to get from one settlement to the other. It's a sparse area of land which just isn't particularly amazing, and I wouldn't really recommend settling in. You're going to have an economic disadvantage over the Romans, or, or the Sassanids or whatever if you settle up here. You're going to have a tactical military disadvantage if you set up here. There's no need to do that. And also, you don't want to settle too early anyway, because like I alluded to earlier, you want to make money and then settle. 10,000 is a decent starting amount, but you're going to be losing money. Let's have a look at the financials. There's no income. Admittedly, no expenditure, but once you get a settlement, then there is going to be expenditure all of a sudden. These are horde armies, meaning you're not paying for them currently. The second they're not hoarding anymore, the second you actually got an empire, you're going to have expenses, but you're not going to have a lot of income because you don't own much territory. That's why the first territory you need to take needs to be a profitable area where you can make money from, and that certainly is not Campus Barbaricum or Vicus Vandali. Now, where would you want to go? First of all, wherever you decide to go, make sure you sack every settlement along the way to get as much money as you can, but also be careful not to destroy a horde faction. If you destroy, for example, the Sarmatians, you take Vicus Sarmatii, then they're going to horde and you're going to have trouble. In my experience, I just leave these Roxolani and Sarmatians and Lombardi and whatever to fight amongst themselves, squabble amongst yourselves, have your petty little battles. I've got bigger fish to fry, and they are Roman fish on the Mediterranean. Very, very tasty indeed, and very, very profitable, like I said. So be wary of who you attack, but really I would sort of go down here and start gunning for the Romans. Now, really there are two obvious options in my experience of where you would want to settle as the Vandals. Either Constantinople, over here, or Rome itself. Now, the reason is, well, there's several reasons. Now, actually, one of the commenters in my Huns video reminded me of this, and I'm pretty sure this is true anyway. The Vandals don't have a culture penalty in the first settlement they settle in, as long as they keep it as their capital. Which means that you want to choose a large settlement, because Because normally when you take a large settlement, you've got all these big buildings, you've got the biggest governor's house, whatever, and it's going to be a big culture penalty. You're going to have a lot of sort of public order issues. But if you negate those public order issues by making it the first place you have, then it doesn't matter even if you've got a big place that is kind of out of control, because actually you've minimised the culture penalty, public order is a little bit more under control, which is good. And also, an area like Constantinople is very, very profitable, so like I said earlier, you want to choose somewhere profitable to start off with. So I would say either Constantinople or Rome. Another thing is, I believe the Vandals cannot make ports. Is there a way I can check that? I don't think I can check that because I don't have a settlement, but I'm pretty damn sure the Vandals can't build ports. And that means you want to settle in places that do already have ports, that the computer has already built ports for. For example, Constantinople. But for example, if you settled somewhere like Colonia Dacia, which doesn't have a port, then you're not going to be making that much money from it. You want to wait until the computer builds a port, then come in, and then you can start making your money, because otherwise, if you take a settlement that doesn't have a port, it's never going to have a port unless the computer takes it back again and builds one. So yeah, make sure you have a nice developed place that you can sort of really make a lot of money from. So whether you go for Constantinople or Rome, make sure where you settle is actually economically viable. Now as for Constantinople or Rome, for me personally I would go for Rome, I think, as the Vandals. The reason is, for the campaign objectives, you've got to be taking northern Italy, this place over here, Carthage, just this place, not particularly important. Carthage isn't really a historically relevant city. That's a joke, by the way. And Cordoba down here. So this is the kind of area you're going to be expanding into. If you go for Constantinople, you're going to have to travel a long, long way to you have to build a big, big empire until you actually reach those final conditions where you can go and win the campaign over here. So yeah, I would say just go for Rome. It's nice in the center of the map, so if you're going to keep it as your capital, it's going to be the center of your empire, which is better for public order issues. But yeah, also, I think as the Vandals, you're going to be heading in this sort of westerly direction anyway, and that's why I think it makes sense to start off in Rome. But also, in my experience, taking out the Western Roman Empire is easier than taking out the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanids. The Sassanids, first of all, aren't to be underrated. They've got some pretty damn good units themselves. The Eastern Roman Empire are in a better shape than the Western Roman Empire, both economically and sort of tactically. And as I discussed in my Western Roman Empire faction guide, they've got a huge amount of issues. Okay, this empire is going to be collapsing after a couple of turns anyway, even if you don't come over. You might as well gorge on all their misery that they're going to be suffering from, and actually take advantage of a very fragmented empire that's dealing with rebellions and religious issues and economic issues and whatever. It makes a lot more sense for me personally to be going for the Western Roman Empire, taking their valuable settlements. They've got some good tech, but unfortunately for them, they've just got many sort of domestic issues for them to work out, and actually it's a lot easier just to kind of sweep through this area rather than trying to sweep through this area. That's my personal opinion. But anyway, I think I've been talking for long enough. I'm going to overheat if I talk for much longer. Yeah, I'm feeling very, very hot, so I'm sorry if I sounded a little bit delirious today. I'm sorry if I said a few stupid things. It is because I am dying of the heat. But anyway, I'm sure I'll be okay soon. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with more videos very, very soon. But this is the conclusion of the Barbarian Invasion faction guides. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.